Show your age. Show your body. Show your strength. Show your edge. Show your killer hair. Show yourself. Hair biology, designed to work with your hair as you age.
Delighted to be here because, you know, New York, the city's so nice, they named it twice. I lived here in my 20s. I call those my Wonder Bread years. And I was very, very happy. And I'm very, very happy now. And I would like all of us to take a moment. I would just invite you, think about what made you happy 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, versus what makes you happy now. It's really something to think about because as we age, and I was worried because I'm sitting near the front and people are looking at my bald spots and I'm like, I need that shampoo or I need something. But what makes you happy today is so different, at least in my mind. It carries threads of what brought us joy as a child. For me personally, I wanted to be an actress, a talk show host, and life got in the way and I got in fashion. And now at the age of 64, I started my own podcast. I'm doing print modeling because the white hair, you know, thank you pandemic. You know, the blonde went away and the white came in. Now I just launched another career, you know, so I'm 65. It's never too late. Just a little bit about that. But I want to start out on my podcast called Ignite Your Spark. I ask my guests, what ignites your spark? How do you ignite your spark? So I want to start that today. Like, how do you get happy? I mean, what makes you, I'm gonna ask both of you, what makes you light up inside?
You asked me this over the phone when we spoke, and I was speechless, which for me is very odd. I was like, that is such a good question. And I gave it a lot of thought after you asked me. And I think it's very similar. So what made me happy 10 years ago or even beyond is being happy with my work, feeling that there are opportunities for me, which I have access to, and really my connection to my family and friends. So that sense of connection and being able to have fun with people who I truly love, and that we're sharing life together in a unique way. And I'm sure all of you can relate to this. You know, before you know it, that new friend, you've known her 10 years. And that's your new friend. Right? You're like, we're new friends. And the years add up. But it's really connecting with the most important part of yourself.
Ooh, I love that. Yes, yeah. How about you?
So I'm going to answer that question indirectly first and then directly. Happiness is like the smell of turkey, your Thanksgiving dinner. It's not the dinner. Happiness is a feeling that comes and goes, it ebbs and flows. But from my most recent work, I found that contentment is the dinner. And there are some elements of contentment like purpose and meaning and satisfaction and having a sense of, resilience within yourself or having your relationships in order. Those are the elements that go into contentment. And those are all things that we can control, not perfectly, but to a larger degree than we think. So happiness is a feeling and contentment is more of a state of being. It's more durable. So in my work, more recently, when I think about happiness, I think more about contentment. Now, a lot of people use those terms interchangeably. It really doesn't matter. Actually, that's fine, as long as you're focused on the right things. So I think about, when I need to get happy, I think about maybe what's not in alignment in those areas in my life. If I need, to answer your question more directly, if I need just a dose of dopamine or a dose of oxytocin, something to give me an immediate lift, I have my go-to things. So I'll bury my nose in my dog's neck for as long as he'll allow me to do it. or I'll take a walk somewhere new, somewhere I haven't walked before so I can see new things, or I'm forever chasing the perfect alpha cup of coffee that I had once 19 years ago in Hawaii. So I've been chasing it ever since. So when I buy that next bag of beans, and it might be the one, I get a little lift. I admit it's usually followed by disappointment, but the quest is fun to me. So that's the way I'll answer that question.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think we all need to take time to think about what makes us happy every single day, because certainly we don't wake up every single day going, I'm glowing. And I try to, but whether it's through meditation or a cup of coffee or reading a passage in something that really inspires you, I'm all about inspiration. And let's do everything we can because to be happy. And to me, happiness is equated to joy and positivity. I mean, you don't want to go into a room and get the lifeblood sucked out by the negative Nelly over there. If you can dig deep down inside and find happiness, you're going to share it with others and they're going to be happy, and so on and so on and so on, right?
I do. I agree. I think it's really important to highlight, though, as human beings, we have a vicissitude of feelings. And we label some bad and some good. Yeah. And when we can acknowledge the human experience brings up a lot of different feelings, of course, I always want to be happy.
Right.
That is my goal. I want to be like, how can I be happiest today? But it's equally important to know that it is not a permanent destination. And the problem is, like with this whole kind of happiness idea, I think we can have it if we allow ourselves to not feel unsuccessful when we don't have it. And so it's all part of the same conversation. So what I would say is one of the things that we can control, just like contentment, is this feeling of optimism and choosing to be optimistic about a situation, choosing to see it as we wish it was, because when you're optimistic, you keep shooting for all of the possibilities that you can have. And I think ultimately that does create a sense of happiness.
Yeah, I don't think we should negate our feelings. I think we should accept them and then work on changing them to happiness should we desire to.
Right. But
because we can wallow in grief because we need to sometimes.
No, right, absolutely. And I was even thinking more like, you know, sometimes we might feel meh, but it doesn't mean we're not a happy person. Right. Because when we kind of put that label on, oh, well, I should, and I hear shoulds all the time in my private practice. I should be more grateful. I should be happy. I should be content, but I'm not. And they feel unsuccessful as a person. So what I would say is you can be a happy, content person most of the time, and when you're not, don't label yourself as unsuccessful because it's a process and it is a cycle.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump onto that. Part of, I think, building a happy or contented life, part of that is struggle and choosing a struggle. And we all do that. We all choose things that challenge us. Motherhood, even, right? How hard is it to raise your kids when you're not sleeping and they're screaming? Yet we all choose that, or most of us choose that, because we know there's a greater good. So we're not happy when we're sleep deprived moment to moment. We're not happy when our kid is spitting up or, you know, has colic. But we choose that endeavor, for instance, or we choose the challenge to work or build a business. Or any of those things, because we know that struggle inherently, although it's difficult from moment to moment, will lead you to a happier life, a life of more satisfaction. One of the things that I noticed, it was mentioned that I do a podcast called The Life Story, and I interview folks that are 85 and older. My youngest age is 85, so I don't know if anyone here in this room would qualify. People who are 85 and older who, good for you, who have lived or are still living extraordinary lives. I interviewed a lady, 104 years old, at work, her work, not mine. She's still working. And I interviewed Holocaust survivors and people who grew up in Japanese internment camps and people who invented 800 toys, just have lived fantastic lives. My average age is about 95. And here's what I noticed, is that they were all happy. And I don't mean I'm just happy I'm not in the ground yet. I mean legit happy. And so we think, I think as a culture or society, that happiness looks like this. Like it starts low, it peaks in midlife, and then it's a slow decline into decrepitude. But actually, there's been work on this. Harvard's done some work on this, and the happiness curve is just the opposite. It's U-shaped. It's high in our youth. It craters in midlife when we have the most pressures on ourselves. Ironically, when we tend to experience our most worldly success, our happiness craters out. And then it begins to rise again after 50. At about the 65-year-old mark, it bifurcates. It splits in two. Half of us keep going up and end our life happier than any other time in our life. The other half go downhill. And that's where my work is about how to keep people on that upper arm of the curve. But it's exactly the opposite that we tend to think it is. And from my work in-depth interviewing these fantastic older folks, I found, I mean, I know it, I didn't believe it at first because it felt self-serving, but it's true. We have happier years to look forward to as we get older. And that's exciting.
I see that in my private practice too, where there's this misconception culturally that youth is where the happiness is, this idealization of youth. And some of the happier people I'm sure that you interviewed, they felt youthful or ageless, and that adds to a sense of happiness. But really, when there's an understanding that happiness, your happiest years can happen at any decade. And I've worked with patients like that. The earlier years were tough. They were dealing with loss. They were dealing with addiction. They were dealing with problematic relationships. But they wanted to work on themselves and continually get better. And then they discovered, oh my God, I'm living my best years. And I had a patient, she was in her 60s, she was single, she was miserable, never been married. And we worked together and she met this man and he really hung in there with her. And she writes me every year. She's like, I'm in Paris. I'm living my best life. We're doing great. I'm so happy with my partner. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this patient is living a better life than I am. You know, and she's traveling around the world with her partner. But it's a beautiful story that I think culture does not allow us to look at. Yeah. You know, that story of it can happen at any moment, at any decade. And when you think about your happiest years, it's not necessarily connected to an age or a youthful age, that we can find happiness in different ways if we're looking for it and know that it exists.
What do you think? I mean, I've read a lot of things about happiness. You know, I read a little bit about it. And when we are constantly learning, growing, expanding our knowledge base, that is one of the keys, I think, to happiness, learning new skills. What do you all think we can do to create happiness in addition to learning new things? Are there some tricks that you can think of?
Well, I'll jump on the learning thing. One of the people I most recently interviewed is a man named Marty Cooper. Marty Cooper is in his 90s. Marty Cooper invented the cell phone. And he was the first man ever to make a cell phone call in front of the press and the FCC. He invented it in 1973. He spent the next 10 years bringing it to market, 1983. He and his wife put together the Jitterbug phone, right, which I think is called Great Call now. Marty's a smart guy, he's an engineer. And Marty taught, on your learning point, Marty taught me something very important that I include in the 5 elements that I think are essential to having a contented life. It's the 5th one, and it's about being a lifelong learner. Mm-hmm. So he continues to learn. He continues to keep up on the things he's interested in, which is technology. And the thing that Marty said to me that really stuck with me is he said, if you stop learning, you lose your ability to learn. And it doesn't take that long. In his mind, he said, people retire, and that's okay, but if your entire retirement is spent around the pursuit of golf or gardening, you lose your ability to learn. And in his mind, and I'm willing to believe him, it takes about 2 years before your ability to learn. I don't know about you, but one of the scariest things that I can think of in my future is I will not have the ability to learn anymore. So being a lifelong learner is absolutely, in my view, one of the essential ingredients to continuing to have a happy and contented life.
Yeah, I think it's really important for all of us, to step outside of our comfort zone every once in a while as well. Not just learn and focus on the things we're interested in, but maybe open your mind to something completely different. And I think that's going to fire up those synapses. I cannot tell you the medical, you know these things, doctor, reasons why, but it's true. We don't lose our brain power. We can have the ability, from what I've read, epigenetics and all, to keep our DNA going, to rechange it, to learn. I learned how to podcast edit. I'm like, what? It took probably a little longer than it might have 30 years ago, but it was a totally different way of using my brain, and it made me happier. I think we need to do things that make us happy, and because a lot of times we defer happiness for the sake of our family or for someone else. But I also want to ask you, as a therapist too, and I know you have an answer to this too, but why do we sometimes choose not to be happy? Why do people sometimes say, well, I went on that vacation, but it was okay? People don't allow themselves, are they embarrassed to be so happy? I mean, what is that? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Well, it's so funny when you first said it was okay. I think people don't want to encourage envy. There are those that do, and there are those that don't. And I think for some people it's uncomfortable, or they have a superstition. They don't want to brag about their happiness because they don't want it taken away, which is one of the challenges of being happy. There's a fear, when's the other shoe going to drop? But to answer your other question, I think it has to do with identity. There are some people who are so merged with their discontent or unhappiness or depression, it becomes part of how they know themselves. And that's part of clinging to what feels familiar. So part of learning is allowing yourself to grow and to think of yourself from a different perspective. And part of that is having different generations be a part of your network. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when I first got into TV, I was a little bit older than the people around me. They were in their 20s. I had just turned 30, and I was actually the older person back then. And it was fun being around 20-year-olds. I was like, oh, I kind of feel a little bit like I'm in my 20s. So really including different generations so you can think differently and you can see how different generations are thinking about the world and themselves in relation to the world. And then the other is really very simplistic. It's just asking yourself, once you know yourself better and you're not burdened with this idea that you have to please somebody else who knows more than you, what lights your fire? What makes you passionate? What are you curious about? What have you always wanted to do? And really create space for that somewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we all have the capability to think back on when we were 8 years old and what did we love most to do, and integrate that into our lives today, because that will bring us joy. Because back then you're not thinking as an 8-year-old, hopefully, am I happy? Am I sad? Am I happy? You just go out and play. You just go out and dress up or whatever, makes you happy.
And one of the things that you did, Kim, too, is that you are very resilient and you had one dream at one point in your life, and then you dreamt a new dream.
Yeah.
And I think we often have to do that.
Yeah.
Sometimes the thing we thought we wanted, it may or may not work out, or sometimes it works out and it doesn't make us as happy as we thought. And being willing to have that new dream, to really think about yourself in a different way. You know, what else can I do? I think is really important.
Yeah, what else? Adding that.
I'm going to jump on if I can. So one of the things that I notice in interviewing both folks for my podcast and then folks for their families is the idea of purpose, right? Which is probably the number one driver in my view of well-being. And your purpose changes over your life. And that's not only fine, it's to be expected, because human beings are stories that are constantly being updated and rewritten. And so sometimes your purpose, you find it because you look for something. I'm thinking of one of my interviewees, but sometimes your purpose is foisted upon you as well. And maybe this will tie back to your original notion about why some people can't be happy. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that people can be happy no matter what their circumstances were. I interviewed Ben Lesser. Ben Lesser is a Holocaust survivor. As a boy, he spent the first 5 years of his life evading Nazi capture, hiding in the false bottoms of coal trucks and under the floorboards of dog houses until he finally, as an 16-year-old, made his way to Hungary, and Hungary being an ally of Germany, he thought he was safe. But Hitler feared that Hungary would switch sides in the war, so he invaded his ally, and that's when Ben got caught. And Ben was sent to the first of 4 Nazi death camps, the 4 worst: Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Dachau, and Durnau. And he was liberated by the Allies. The camp he was in, Dachau, was the last camp, of course, to be liberated. And Ben was moments from death when the Allies came in. He spent months in a coma, a medically induced coma, to come back to life, only to find that all of his family, his extended family, everyone was gone. Ben came to America, made a life for himself, was a UPS driver for many years, couldn't speak the language, wasn't educated because he spent his young life running, right, not in school, made a life for himself, eventually became a real estate agent, had kids. His children knew he was a survivor, but didn't know the details. He didn't share them. For 50 years, Ben didn't speak about his life. Who could blame him? He didn't want to put this burden on his children. The one thing he didn't have as a child was a happy life, and he wanted his children to be happy. And then his grandson had a show and tell one day at school, and he invited Grandpa in to speak about his life, thinking Grandpa would talk about real estate. And Ben said, you know, it's very hard for a grandfather to refuse a grandson anything, right? So Ben said, okay. And he thought, what am I going to do? What am I going to say to 10-year-olds about my life? But that day, Ben decided to tell his whole story. Something shifted in him that day. And he spoke about his life to all these 10-year-olds that day. He hasn't stopped speaking since. That led to him speaking to other groups. And now he's invited to important conferences, and he speaks to groups around the world, and he started a foundation. I'm saying this happened in his 80s. He's 94 now. Ben is engaged in the world at 94 in a way that matters. And he's in demand, and he's super handsome still. And so that's a purpose that was foisted upon him. But he was ready for it at the time, and he's making a difference in the world. So your purpose throughout your life changes. It probably should change. Yeah. And sometimes you find it, and sometimes the world finds it. The universe finds it for you.
Beautiful.
That is such
What
a
an
great story. If
amazing
that's not
story.
inspirational.
Wow.
Yeah. And you share it so beautifully too, which is really, really special. And I think that is why so many, you hear the stories, so many people go downhill when they retire because they don't have a purpose anymore. I know a lot of women who stop working and then flounder. What do I do now? Because, and especially during COVID, when we're locked at home for so long, if you aren't super motivated to get out there and learn a new skill, you're just going to wallow in self-despair and watch Netflix and Tiger King and all that, which I did but didn't wallow.
Yeah,
you know.
right. I enjoyed Tiger King myself. and I do think, too, it takes a little bit of moxie.
Yeah.
Because we're hearing all of these beautiful stories of people living their best lives or finding a new purpose. And culture is lagging behind, especially American culture, because there's something about we're a young country, and our country thinks in a very adolescent mindset. You know, that it's all about youth, it's a popularity contest, and that's, you know, the way to find happiness, and it's not. And so sometimes we need to stand up, get noticed, make sure that we're noticed for all of the right reasons. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book, Your Best Age Is Now. Every book at the time was about loss, what you're losing, and people mocking themselves. And I felt this is not really representing the truth that I see. And I went to look at the research, and it wasn't representing the current research that was going on, where we continue to make new brain cells. We actually are better in the sense that we tend to see the glass more half full as we get older. So to be knowledgeable about what midlife and beyond looks like, and then be in charge of recreating and rebranding that image wherever we can.
Yeah. I think you're right. It takes moxie and it takes a desire. You want to learn something new. You want to be happier or more content. Yeah. But you can't just say, I want to be happier or more content, right?
I have another story.
Take action.
Yeah. Do we have time? I have another
your
story.
Stories. Go on with your story.
All right. This one is, they're not really my stories. They're people I've had the privilege to interview. But Eleanor Pendergraft is another one. And Eleanor is in her late 80s, and she's just a great old Southern broad. And Eleanor had a rough young life and a bum of a husband. My words, not hers, and 6 children, all under the age of 10, when the bum of the husband left her. And she started falling and dropping things, and she couldn't figure out why, and she went to the doctor, and she was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, which is a terrible disease. It's not what she had. She was misdiagnosed. Something was wrong with Eleanor, but not that. And so she continually got worse, and eventually her 2 youngest children were removed from her because she could no longer care for them and put in foster care. She couldn't drive without foot pedals. She lost her job as a trust officer at a bank, and things were pretty rough for Eleanor. She finally got correctly diagnosed. It was MS. She went to the doctor one day, and the doctor said, you've fallen, you keep hitting your head. She went from 1 cane to 2 canes to a walker to a wheelchair. And he said, you're getting worse, and you're never going to get any better. And she said, you're wrong. And there was power in those words. There's something about saying you're wrong that really resonated within her. And that day she dragged herself literally into a silver sneakers class. Do you know what that is? In the gym. And I also interviewed the silver sneakers instructor that was there that day, who saw Eleanor wheel herself in, and she thought, oh my God, she's coming for silver sneakers. I mean, you know, I can't do anything with her. And that first day in class, all Eleanor could do was sit in a chair and lift 1 leg 2 inches off the ground, not even the other. But she kept coming. And then eventually she could move 2 legs, and then she stood and she went around the track with her walker, and she kept going. And then she got out of the wheelchair onto the walker, from the walker back to 2 canes, from 2 canes back to 1 cane. She's in her mid-70s now doing this. And one day when the gym wasn't all that busy, she saw people running around the track, and she thought, I'd like to run. And she dropped her cane and tried to run. She didn't get very far. Quarter of the way around the track was a tiny track, but she didn't stop. She kept going to the gym, and the people in the gym would see her, and the encouragement of strangers meant something to her. She didn't know these people, but she was alone in the world, and someone saying, hey, you're doing great, really meant something to her. Anyway, she hasn't stopped running, and the upshot is that Eleanor is a medal winner in the National Senior Olympics.
Wow.
She's been running ever since. She was at the National Senior Olympics last week, and she has a scooter in her front hall, which she had to take around when she was immobile, and she's got 300 Senior Olympic medals hanging from it now. So the lesson there is you can always do something, right? A little something. If you're unhappy, right, or you feel unbalanced or disconnected or something is wrong in your life, the notion, just knowing that you can always do something at any age, I think is a very uplifting thought, right? And one, I mean, I found Eleanor maybe the most inspirational of everybody that I've interviewed for that reason. And I think about her every day when my sciatica, right, it flares up, or I think, oh, my business is not advancing exactly the way I want. I think I can always do something.
Ah, beautiful.
So great.
So beautiful.
Mindset, it just shows the power of our brain, the power of making a decision to move forward, to take a single step towards a goal, even if you don't know what that goal is. Because her goal probably at the time was not to be a senior Olympian. It was just to put one foot in front of the other without a cane. And I think that's where we all have to start towards our own goal of happiness.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so true. And I certainly see that with patients. It's a mindset shift that allows them to take that one step, whether it's rebelling or an image that they're fighting for. Yeah. So never stop fighting for who you want to be and who you need to be, because that person is there. You just have to give birth.
Yeah, so true. You know, does anybody have any questions for these amazing women who just have learned so much through what you've done? Go ahead.
You mentioned, I don't remember
Leslie and Robbie.
You had 5 key points that you go through with Fite. You mentioned the last one of the gentleman. And would you mind telling us the 5?
Sure. Yeah. So I speak about this quite a bit. Yeah, I had mentioned that in interviewing the ton of older folks that I have distilled 5 elements that I think are essential for a contented life from speaking to them. They taught it to me. One of them was about lifelong learning. The first one is about purpose, which was the Ben Lesser story I used to illustrate it. Another one is Eleanor's story, is about you can always do something. Other things about having a contented life in your old age have to do, another one is about dealing with loss and how you deal with loss. Millie Keller taught me this, she's 104. When you live to 104, like Millie does, right, with working and with a fast smile and a quick wit, that's really a privilege. But it also comes with a cost, that you outlive everyone, right? Millie has outlived her children in some cases.
Wow.
And so the way that you learn to, being faced with loss when you get older is inevitable. The way that you learn to handle that loss and view that loss in a more philosophical way, the way Millie put it to me is we're born to die, and we had a long conversation about that. That's another one. And the 5th one is about having a small army. There's no time to tell this story. It was about Beverly Schottenstein, who got ripped off at 94 by her money managers at JP Morgan. And here's the twist. They were her adult grandchildren. And and Beverly is not a financially sophisticated woman. Judy Katz knows her as well. She's not a financially sophisticated woman, but she does know right from wrong, like most of us do. And she fought back and took everybody to court, including JP Morgan, the world's biggest bank. And she did it with the help of a granddaughter and a caregiver who was I think she was a Jamaican caregiver, who was the first one to ring the alarm bell. So when you get older, essential to having a happy life is to have a small army of people on which you feel you can depend. I tend to be a loner. So that was one that spoke to me because I realized I have to change my ways or I'm going to get very lonely and sad as I get older. So those are the 5.
And that's backed by longitudinal studies as well, that the big determinant of happiness as you get older is the people you are connected to, having a community, making sure that you fight loneliness, which is
And so many of us feminist women were taught we can do it all. We don't need someone else to help us. And I think that as we age, we have to embrace the fact that there are people who not only want to help us, but that we can count on. And that's, to your point, we do have to create that. We can't just let it come to us. I mean, some people are fortunate enough to do that. But accept it. Accept the help.
and pursue it if you don't have it.
Before we sort of wrap up, do you have anything in your book that you want to share with people, about what nuggets you might have put in there?
I think about the 2 people in my book that were really powerful. Suzanne Summers was somebody who told me she doesn't even really necessarily think of age, but she uses her age to create a career. That's her branding, whatever age she is. And she loves aging because it means more life. And it was just such a wonderful way of looking at aging, especially in Hollywood. And the other thing is the importance of meaning. That connected to joy and happiness is meaning. What gives you meaning? It could be something really small, like just smiling on the street, but just knowing you have an impact in something very important, and we all can do it, is pretty powerful.
I think that is so valid. When we do for others, we are lifted up.
Yes.
But when we are doing it honestly and not just trying, but exactly finding someone and giving them a compliment because you mean it. Mm-hmm. Thanking your barista. You've all heard that thing, well, buy a cup of coffee for the person behind you. Don't tell them you bought it for them. But it kind of gives you a little glow. Remember, we used to have toll booths, Yeah, remember that? And I remember I was with someone and we were traveling and I said, let's put this in for the person behind us. But there was a toll guy. So how fun that person got to experience a free toll. And, I would never see that person. And I just think if we can give to others and give back, you are going to gain so much happiness from it.
They actually found during the pandemic that's what was missing when we were all in isolation. Those little minor interactions where you'd smile to somebody or they'd say, oh, I like your dress, that those interactions were so powerful. And we didn't even think about it. And it gave us a sense of feeling connected. I would also say, look for the light. And how can you bring light to others? Because when you're thinking of yourself in terms of a channel for good, that also feeds our soul and our psyche.
And I guess the last optimistic thought I'll try and leave you with is one thing that I've learned is you're never done. Right? No matter what age you are, and speaking to all these older folks have taught me that you are never done. There's always a potential next chapter for you, which can be more exciting and more satisfying and more meaningful than even things that you've done your whole life till now. You know, in the last century, we've added 34 years to our life expectancy. In the last century, we've added more years to our life than all previous centuries, than all previous years that human beings have been on the earth. So in terms of human history, it's just the blink of an eye that we're living this long, and I think culturally we kind of haven't caught up with that yet. But we have a whole nother life now to live when we get to 50 or 60 or 70. There's a whole nother life in front of us. So if you, despite what the advertisers today, although that's changing, might tell you, know deep down in your soul that you are just never done.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I love particularly, and we will end, but that you said about your light. That's the whole purpose, I feel like, of my podcast, Ignite Your Spark. My thought is when we shine our light on people doing great work in the world, then they're going to share that light, like the sparkler effect, I call it.